Okay? So having admitted that, I'm now going to publicly announce my debt to Widrow and Hoff. Okay? So here's the debt that I owe them. I spent 14 years, those of you that know about academics, it comes in cycles in the US. You have every 7th year as a sabbatic. So what I find is that I work for 6 years, and the 7th year I'm working on a particular topic, and if I've been successful, I can go visit the top place in the world. And everything is just great. 7 years after that, I'm bored. The problem, to be honest, has gotten too hard for me, okay, as the field progresses, and the students seem to be interested in something else. So my career is kind of taking this thing where I go 7 years, I'm at the peak. Next 7 years I hit a valley, I change topics, and I do it again. So I'm in my 3rd one now, which I'll mention in a second, but the first 2 have to do with LMS. So the first 14 years, remember I came in wanting to do feedback control. So the first 14 years I spent looking at problems where in fact this one rule about the inputs being independent of the weights was violated. So anytime you have a signal coming back from the output back into the inputs, and this happens in lots of places, so I'll list a few that I've worked on, though this is not about me per se, it's just that I have to say this in order to point out to you why I owe such a debt to these 2. Feedback control, pulse system models, system identification, adaptive IR filters. Some of these were started actually while I was a student in Widrow's group, and in fact John and I and another colleague of ours, Mike Larimore, who was also a student of Lloyd's in his master's, and Lloyd sent him off to Stanford. I think that's the highest praise, in fact, if you send one of your students to work with your former advisor. We looked at this as grad students, and that turned out to be just the right time, because most of LMS up to that point had been for finite impulse response communication. Difference in pulse code modulation, echo cancellation, where actually you have the echo coming back into the filter, and also other things, adaptive control of noise and ducts. So 14 years, so 7 years, I'm working mostly in the control systems area, again the higher level mathematics there, rather than the actual building things. But then it got too hard. And what was happening actually in the control field was that people realized that the real hard problem was when the system was nonlinear, and each of those kind of bifurcates into their particular application area. There's no unified theory, and the field kind of dissipated. You were right. Okay, you told me that was going to happen. I didn't believe you. Then since I had the good fortune of being in Doc's group when they were focusing on signal processing and communications, then the next 14 years it was spent getting rid of the other basic assumption, that is throwing away the desired signal. And I had the good fortune of being an office mate with John Treichler, who was one of the co-inventors of what's called the constant modulus algorithm, of CMA, which was one of the first signal processing LMS-like, if you want to think of it that way, schemes that dealt with this absence of a desired signal. So there's 28, 30 years of my career that all I did was go in and say, oh wow, here's something important, let me change one thing, and basically see what happens, and then go look for all the various applications. And in the case of this one, I was fortunate enough to know one of the co-inventors of one of the first algorithms, so I got there early. I would like to say that it was all by, well, I saw the future and I went after this topic, but it was a complete accident. And we had the experience as well, writing a proposal that Paul was mentioning a minute ago, and wrote a proposal. We threw away the reviews just a few years ago, right? You didn't keep yours. You still got 3 reviews. I guess one review was, nobody's ever going to build a digital radio. Second review was, why would you ever worry about not having a desired signal? And I guess a few years after, the year after we got these reviews, John left academics, founded AST, and has built this 700-person company off of exactly that basic algorithm. And 4 years after this, every signal processing conference you went to, about 40% of it was about blind this and blind that. And basically, one could see all these things. I mean, I was a little hot-headed as a student. We had lots of arguments, okay? And I had to believe that LMS was just so absolutely, intolerably dumb in terms of it being so simple, that there had to be other more sophisticated things that are going to whip it, you know? And so basically, I spent a lot of time trying to deal with alternate models, lattice, IR, things like that. And what we discovered is that every time the key to finding the basic algorithm that worked was to try in some way to make it look like the kernel of LMS. So in other words, if there was something extra in there, you added some filtering to the algorithm so that when it was all put together, the error system looked like LMS again. There's the trick. You could have done that yourself, okay? Anybody could have. Well, that was the first 14 years. The second 14 years was kind of like the multimodal surface you described, because that's what we found, is it looks more like an egg carton instead of a single bowl. Having said that, everybody has to do this one thing. So if you want to have the inspiration that Doc gave all of his students, I'm going to have to ask you to do a little something here, okay? Because in his teaching, what he always did was during this period, at least in the 70s, he talked about sending the bowl. What he did in lecture was he put his hands together like this. Can you do this? Just put your hands together like they're a bowl. Oh, come on, I'm not kidding. Come on, don't be so stiff, engineers. Okay. So what he told us, and the thing that happened when I was there in the 70s, was the bowl moves. Okay, so what the algorithm is trying to do is track it. Okay? And so he's always got this image. This is one of the things we always associated with Doc, was this idea that immediately he would cup his hands and talk about descending this bowl. He already did it for you once, you just didn't notice it. Okay? And at the time we thought this was a little old-fashioned, to say the least. Okay? But in fact, one of the things that I carry away from that now is that I feel like Doc taught me is if you're going to try to convince somebody of an idea, you really don't want to tell it to them at the most complicated level. It's very good to have some simple image that everybody can immediately sort of intuitively understand. You can deal with all the complications later. And so this was a trademark. In the office when we were joking, we'd say, this kind of thing. So, but from these very, very simple things, there's some of the things that I at least carried away with me, and I've used them over and over again in my teaching and also in my approach to research. But there are more personal things that I'd like to thank Doc for, and I guess since the audience is not too large, it allows me to say these without great embarrassment. So I want to thank you for a few things. So one of them is admission to the PhD, so I put them in chronological order. I don't know how many of you are aware of the way the qualifying exam works at Stanford. You have 12 minutes apiece with 10 different professors or something like that. And they give you scores, and then they add up all the scores and weight them and so on and so forth, and they pass the top quarter of people that take it and fail the bottom quarter and then argue about the middle half. Okay? And the way I was told, because we're not on the faculty, we don't really know what's happening, is they go into a big meeting of the faculty, they pass the top few, and then they go to the next line and they say, does anybody know this student? And as long as somebody stands up and says, oh, I know them, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're terrific, they go, okay, the next one. Until they get to a student where somebody says, don't know. Okay, they go back up to the one previously and draw a line under that name. That's all the people that pass. Okay? They might argue about a few more down the list, but really that's the people that pass. So the day that we're waiting in the office to hear whether or not we pass, because it's only once a year that the qualifying exam comes about, one of the faculty came in, not Doc, to our office and had a list. So he's going, you passed, you didn't, you passed, that kind of thing. Around the office, there's a bunch of us in there waiting. And he comes to me and he says, oh, you! He said, look! He's not supposed to show me the list. I'm never supposed to have known about this. He said, look, the line's right above you, right below your name. So I was the last one. Now, how did that happen? Well, it turns out that I got told by another faculty member later that Professor Widrow had said some very nice things about me in that meeting. I guess I've never had an opportunity to thank you as much as I should have. It's a bit emotional, I guess, but thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Okay? So,